Hello, it's Blitz with Muffin here, and as many of you already know, the MS-2 event has started. This is now a tank that used to be in the game, very legendary, first Russian tank that had come out, designed 1926. Wargaming World of Tanks Blitz on their channel had come out with this video. I'm not going to go through it in depth. I know some YouTubers already have. I'm going to go over and just look at these stats, just talk about the event a little bit. There's a lot of hype around this tank. Some people even saying that they're going to be playing this thing until their arms fall off. Now, when going in and looking at this tank, when comparing it to some of the other tanks, so I'm going to go ahead and pull up just a few of the tanks that were the original Tier 1s. This was the MS-1 Light Tractor T1 Cunningham and the Vickers Medium Mark 1. So the MS-1 overall, this is the original stats of what it was. We're going to see what it's like compared to now entering Tier 2. Has Wargaming increased some of the stats, buffed it a little bit better to fit within Tier 2, still keep some of that legendary status, and that's what we're going to find out. MS-1 now has this HD quality aspect to it, which absolutely looks beautiful. I love how Wargaming is doing. You can see some of the legendary camo here, some of the marks just looks absolutely beautiful. And so overall, historically, the MS-1 had, honestly, I mean, it was okay DPM, great penetration, had good alpha, aim time, not the best, but honestly better dispersion than the others, okay gun depression, okay maneuverability, and it had some of the best armor in the game. Now we can actually see what this collectible will look like in this event if you get it. So we're going to see, just from looking at it, the penetration 51, as you can see here, it's still the same. The average damage, looking at 55, I can see here it's about the same. So far they're keeping the stats pretty much the same. Aim time 0.25. We can see here time on the old one was 2.5. On the new one it's now 1.1, so better. Dispersion at 0.4, which is now better. This used to be 0.46. The gun depression, looking at that, let's take a look. Still 8 degrees, so looking pretty good. Mobility, we got an engine power to weight ratio of 14.09, and which is looking faster. So there are some buffs they've made to this tank, now putting it in a Tier 2 rank. Going in, let's take a look at some of the armor aspects of it. Go into the 3D model. And we can see here, it looks like it's got about 16 millimeters. Of course, that does change on those upper sloped, making it about 38 millimeters thick, which is pretty good when you start looking at some Tier 2 tanks, for example. Let's see, so about 39 millimeters of thickness on this armor. Tier 2 is not going to have that hard of a time penetrating it compared to the old version of Tier 1. Maybe when angling it as such, I mean, you do get up to about 40 millimeters, maybe using that gun depression a little bit, you do get maybe up to about 60 millimeters of penetration. But, and at that point you might be able to deflect, but at the most part, people are going to be aiming for this flatter plate, which only has about 27 millimeters. So I don't know. I know in the advertisement here for Wargaming, I think right as this Panzer takes a shot, it does have this effect of bouncing to let the player base know that the MS-1 is back and it can still bounce rounds and be just as strong. But comparatively, I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case now entering Tier 2 and having some of these similar stats, these armor stats, as it did. So not a whole lot changing here. Let me go back and look here. So when you're looking at this, this had 18 millimeters of armor. This looks like they've almost reduced a little bit. Of course, this has, let's see, what are we looking at here? So turret armor, this could be an issue because if you're looking at some of these other tanks, they have about 35, 45, 45 millimeters of armor. MS-1 only having about 18 to 16 millimeters of armor. That's not going to be that great. The armor is not going to have, in my case from what I'm looking at, From my standpoint, it doesn't look like it's going to be as effective, and what maybe a lot of players may remember the MS-1 as back in the day. So might be something to be a little careful of when playing this. Whereas the MS-1 had been classically known to have the most armor at its tier compared to the others, it now has some of the least amount of armor compared to other tanks that it's going to be fighting against. And once again, with the penetration of some of the other tanks, they're not going to have that hard of a time penetrating it. Looking at even some of the engine power to weight ratio, this is going to be putting this tank in a much different position than what it was originally back in the day. So August 26th to September 4th is when the event is happening. So there you go, 15 victories, and the prize of the MS-1 is yours. Some other prizes here, you can get the puddle, which honestly, the puddle, from looking at it under the armor inspector, doesn't have as good of armor as the recent copy-paste kind of version of this tank, the French one that had recently come out. That one actually did look a little bit stronger. So you can see here it's got about 110 millimeters of spaced armor, and then 100 millimeters behind that. And then if you look at the puddle, so yeah, when looking at this, you only have 107 millimeters of armor, and then only 20 millimeters of armor behind that. It's a lot weaker, and tanks aren't going to have as much of a hard time penetrating this. There are a lot of other prizes here, so some good things that you can win, some certificates and credits and things of that nature. So 45 victories will earn you the puddle. Now you'll notice here it doesn't really show a lot of tanks bouncing rounds off this tank, and if you can see here, when it does go back to the tank, you can see a penetration mark right through its gun mantlet, so that's actually quite funny. But I feel like World of Tanks Blitz was being a little bit more honest there. So anyway, this isn't really necessarily about the MS-1. There's a lot of other things going on here, but I thought this was just some interesting things to bring up. The MS-1 could be a little bit of a disappointment for some players. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments below. I know there's, once again, been a lot of hype around this. A lot of people have a very high perception of the MS-1. And when it was played with back in the day, those were some of the popular elements of this tank with its armor, and it really was the best tier 1 of its time. But now going into tier 2 and looking at some of the stats of the tanks it's going to be up against, I'm wondering if the player base is going to be a little disappointed with this tank. So you'll have to let me know in the comments below based on what we had shared today. This is the Muffin here. You guys stay cool and keep tanking.